All right, let's talk about the top quarterback prospects looking into the 2025 NFL draft. Yes, it's a long time away. We're only in mid-November, but with the Giants team at 2-8, we have to just do it and dive into it because we think there's no better time than right now to look ahead towards the future. Obviously, we're not in April yet, so our in-depth draft coverage, and even in March, which we get into as well, where we actually rank these guys 1 through 5, 1 through 10, whatever you want to call it. We're not going to do that just yet, but we are just going to kind of discuss and bounce back and forth these different players. And we will give you obviously a little tidbits on who we like, who we enjoy watching, and things of that nature. But, not only are we in the heart of the NFL season right now, we're also in the heart of college football season. And, these guys, I should say, these prospects are still playing. So these are their stats, obviously, to right now. Once the rest of the season shape out, we can kind of have more in-depth discussions and rank them. Okay. With that being said, I'm going to start with my favorite player. I will say that. And that guy is Cam Ward. Was at Washington State for the past 2 seasons before coming to Miami for his senior year. A 66.6 right now per completion percentage, which is the highest in his career. Almost 3,500 passing yards, 32 TDs, 6 interceptions. He's great in the pocket. The thing that happens with Cam Ward that's made him go viral on social media especially is his nonchalantness in the pocket. His ability to navigate throughout inside and outside and scramble out is something that is very unique in the way that it doesn't even seem like he wants to be there. he'll dodge and dip in between defensive tackles and linebackers and do it in a way that just seems like it's slow motion, but it's so fluid at the same time. And that's what's really been baffling about watching Cam Ward. He's also a great deep passer. When he dips and dodges between those defensive linemen and then throws a 50-yard bomb, you're kind of just saying, oh my goodness, with your mouth wide open about how he just did that. He's also relatives, funny enough, this is completely out of nowhere, but with Quandre Diggs, if anyone wants to know, little tidbit, little shout out there. He's got the NFL in his genes, some could say. And I have his NFL comparison very similar to a guy that's a youngster in the NFL. Anthony Richardson is who I compare Cam Ward to. And that's just what I wanted to talk about to start out this little discussion. Alex?
Yeah, it's so funny you brought up Anthony Richardson. I was actually going to use him in comparison with another guy that I think we're going to talk about pretty soon, being Jalen Milroe, who is, I think, at least in terms of characteristics and his lack of accuracy in the middle of the field and short range, very similar to Anthony Richardson. But yeah, in terms of Ward, I think he's still inconsistent, which is something that obviously is always going to be the case with someone who doesn't have a ton of experience yet, who's still in college. And that's something that you see a ton with a lot of these guys, right? Every single quarterback in this class, I would say, has probably greater than what you'd like inconsistency when you're probably looking at drafting quarterback in the top 5. In previous years, obviously, it didn't turn out to be great, but Bryce Young, obviously very consistent. CJ Stroud, very consistent. Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May, all of those guys, very, I'd say, more level, steady college careers. But in this class, I don't think there really is that. So you are going to have to take a shot on a project such as an Anthony Richardson. Obviously, that hasn't completely worked out for the Colts yet. But I think Cam Ward is a much better passer of the football. He is much more accurate than Anthony Richardson ever was in college. What I really find crazy about Cam Ward is he can kind of make those really special, I know I'm going to sound like Chris Collinsworth here, but Mahomes style throws where he can kind of, really just utilize his arm angles in some crazy ways that you just don't see normal quarterbacks doing. And I always talk about the it factor when it comes to quarterbacks, the guys, can they really, put a team on their back? Can they, win games single-handedly? And I think Cam Ward has shown this season that he can do that with his play with Miami. And I do think he is someone who thrives under the lights. He's not someone who's going to shy away under the lights, which obviously has been an issue here for Daniel Jones. And I do really like that. But I think there's a lot of the inconsistencies. There is like a lack of kind of pre-snap reads. Obviously, the turnovers were a big issue. In previous years for him as well. He's gotten a lot better this year, but still something that's a little bit concerning. But I do definitely like him. I was talking to Josh. We were talking about the quarterbacks a couple days before we actually did this. And I was kind of talking about how I wasn't actually super big fan of Cam Ward just based on some of the clips I'd seen, but I looked more into him, watched some of his film more, and some of the crazy throws he can make. And I will have to say, I think I'm a bigger fan than I was maybe even just a few days ago.
There we go, Alex. I'll take that definitely into account.
I still wouldn't say he's
sure.
number one in the class. But he finishes the season strong. I can see myself being there.
Let's talk about someone who you do think is number one in this class, because I know who your favorite is. I had my time to talk about my favorite. Alex, who's your favorite in this year's NFL draft?
I think my favorite, I wouldn't say, I'm honestly, between the three guys that I think are the consensus top three, I genuinely don't know who my top guy would be for sure now at this point. But I think my favorite prospect out of the three is Jalen Milroe. I think he's very inconsistent in the passing game, especially in the short and intermediate areas. There was a stat that I believe I looked up from throws between 10 and 19 yards. He is one of the least consistent in terms of accuracy in the entirety of college football, which is not something you want to see from a potential top 5, top 10 first round pick. But his athletic ability, he might be just as, if not more athletic than Anthony Richardson. His it factors, I say, he can make some special throws. And I really think, I do think there's something to be said about playing at a big school and having that big school pressure on top of you. Colorado, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of pressure that comes with the Coach Prime aura that you could say, or the spotlight that's on them. Yes, Miami's a big school, but none of those schools are the same as Alabama. And obviously it didn't work out for Bryce Young, but I think there is something to be said about playing top SEC talent week in and week out. And I do think Jalen Milroe, he has his ups and downs, don't get me wrong, but he just feels like a player to me, very much like Josh Allen, who's very inconsistent. Josh Allen could not make those throws either in college. He could not do the short and intermediate throws. But some of those deep balls that he threw, just like Jalen Milroe, was fantastic. His athletic ability, very similar. And it's more of a gut feeling thing than anything else, that I think there's something to be said that some of the other guys have better tape out there. But I think Jalen Milroe, in terms of the, I guess, outside attributes, the eye test, the gut feeling, for me, is one of my favorite guys in this quarterback class. Now, without saying he's the best, right? I don't know if he's the best yet. I think there's a lot of season left to play, right? That's also important. And I think Alabama's obviously not had a great season. So there's a lot to be said from that standpoint as well. So there's a lot of positives and negatives with all these quarterbacks, but I do really like Jalen Milroe. And I think with the proper coaching and proper development, I don't know if that's the Giants, but with the proper coaching and development, he could turn into an absolute superstar.
At Bama all 4 years, started the last 2 seasons, technically a junior with the red shirt involved there. 67.4% completion percentage, which currently right now, if it holds up, will be a career high. Over 2,000 yards passing. However, look at that TD to interception ratio, 13-6. Not many TDs thrown, and then the interceptions stack up there as well. But a player that, if you want to talk about a guy that is versatile in the way he could use his legs, that is the definition of Jalen Milroe, where you say, oh, well, he only has 13 passing touchdowns. He has 16 on the ground. The quarterback has more rushing touchdowns than he does passing. That's just the way he's been used in Alabama's offensive scheme. 114 rushes for 565 yards and 16 touchdowns. So not many yards used, but definitely in the red zone, able to scramble out of the pocket and get that score if need be, or start in the backfield and just scramble in for a touchdown on the goal line. That very explosive dual threat quarterback that you want to see. Also able to throw outside the numbers. But Alex, you want to talk about a player who's clutch in a guy we just talked about of Cam Ward for Miami? Someone who is not clutch so far in crunch time has been Jalen Milroe. You look at the game against Georgia. You look at the game against Vanderbilt. He threw an interception on the first play during the final drive opportunity against Tennessee. That was pathetic. That was really bad. I watched that game live. I said, all right, let's see what Jalen Milroe can do. 2-minute drive. Giants fans tune in and watch. And the first play of what could have been this game-winning drive for Alabama, he throws an interception, and it was behind the wide receiver. It was thrown actually right into one of the Volunteers' hands, and they get that interception. So that is why I just do not think Jalen Milroe, or I know he's not my favorite, and that's why I don't think he's if he's not number one out of the top prospects, but I do have a comparison of him to Jalen Hurts, Alex. That's my NFL comparison for Jalen Milroe. Let's talk about a guy that both of us dislike now in that top three conversation, and that's a guy out of the Sanders family. Shedeur Sanders was at Jackson State with his father, obviously, a couple years ago. Now this past 2 seasons with Colorado, he's a senior. 72.9% passing completion percentage. That's unbelievable. That will right now, if it stands, also be a career high for him. We were talking about Milroe. We were talking about Cam Moore in the 60s. 73% is really high. Over 2,800 yards passing. 2,882 specifically, and a 24-6 TD to interception ratio. The guy's got great accuracy. He's trustworthy in late game situations. But what's the problem with Shedeur Sanders? Well, on the field, trouble escaping the pocket and just not NFL ready. That's simply putting it. What I believe is the deal with Shedeur Sanders is that the guy, he's showing it on the field right now. I don't think his play translates to the NFL level. As I call him every time I talk about him, I believe he is a college football quarterback. And what I mean by that is he is made for the game of college football. The explosive offense, the high-scoring games that you see, the lackluster defenses. He's made to play in that environment. But when he gets to the NFL and the pace slows down a little bit and you have to go over your reads and find those options and maybe you're going to score 10 points in a football game, 20 points in a football game in a defensive battle, I don't think he's going to be ready for it. And I think because of that, he's going to make mistakes as he already, as we've seen in college, has trouble navigating inside and outside the pocket. Those will lead to mistakes, and he will have trouble with turnovers, I think, in the NFL level. I don't think he's ready. You can bring up another point. He's only been coached by his dad. His entire life, it really seems like he's only been coached by his dad. If you're playing college football, all 4 years you've been coached by your father and you're expected to go to an NFL team with a different head coach, that is really weird. It's just the whole situation's odd. I don't think he's going to work on an NFL team, and especially what Alex mentioned at the end of last episode, he's got personality problems. He's very, very selfish, and I think that what we saw out of what he's getting with NIL money, leading all of college football, congratulations to him. He's a son of an NFL superstar and someone who's around the globe on posters of football, college football, NFL. Deion Sanders is a legend in itself. Love Deion Sanders. Now, I don't know if you're going to be able to follow in the footsteps of your father in the way that Shedeur Sanders is going to have to do. I know I just ranted for a little bit. I'm going to give Alex to speak on this as well because I want to hear his opinion. But that is really the case where I leave it at. Yes, he's a top 3 projected quarterback in this year's draft, but he is not an NFL quarterback, and I stand by that.
Yeah, I think there's 2 things you look at with Shedeur Sanders, right? It's the on the field, what his stats say, which is that he's an elite prospect. His stats say that he's an absolutely elite prospect. And even the eye test says that he's an absolutely elite prospect. But I don't want to say personality, but it's the off the field antics at times that I do think are going to come back to bite him, especially in a city like New York. He's very much a similar personality to his father. He's very flashy, and he is very confident in himself. For better or worse, right? And I think some of the weaknesses in his game, funny enough, reflect his personality. I think sometimes he's a little bit too overconfident in some of his personal talent. He thinks he can fit a ball in a really, really tight window when it's really just not going to happen, or he'll make the wrong read at times because he goes for the all-in ball instead of the safer option. And I think there's certain things that come personality-wise, personality traits that correlate to how you play on the football field. But I do think in terms of his accuracy, in terms of actually how he processes post snap and pre snap. I think he's actually very much at an NFL level. I just don't know. I don't want to say emotionally, but I don't know if he's able, like you said, being coached by your dad for your entire life, your entire college career is very, very comforting because he's always got your back, right? He comes to the Giants. There's nothing really tying him to Brian Daboll if he's still the coach at that time. There's nothing really tying him like being a blood relative, like being your father. So I think he gets a lot of chances. He got a lot of chances when he was younger that maybe other QBs wouldn't have gotten with Deion Sanders. And I think kind of not having to fight through some of that adversity is something that is actually a little bit worrying to me as well. So it's not necessarily what's being shown on tape or what he can do on the field, but it's some of these off the field red flags that I think are very concerning. And, the Giants definitely, and Joe Schoen in particular, really emphasize the off the field almost as much, if not more, than the on the field.
Yeah, Alex, it's kind of like, it's interesting because, I'm like, my father coached my little league team to, when I was in elementary and middle school, right? I'm calling a football game tomorrow night, a high school championship game, where the nephew of the head coach is the quarterback. It's the starting quarterback on the team. We're talking about Shedeur Sanders and a player that's a senior in college now, about to go to the NFL, and all he's known is his dad being his coach. It's very weird. It sort of like, I feel like it's allowed, like in a general sense, when your dad's your coach in elementary and middle school for whatever you play, or even in high school for that matter. I mean, like the nephew thing, like, it makes sense. It's like, yeah, cliche, right? Your dad, your nephew, whatever, is the coach of the football team. But when you're talking about you're a senior at a huge university like Colorado, and your dad's the head football coach, something doesn't seem right there. And I don't know.
There's even talk now, Josh. I don't know if you saw this, that the Cowboys could potentially draft Shedeur Sanders, and then they'd hire Deion or Coach Prime to be the coach. So, like, all that is a very big red flag to me. But are you willing to take the risk because of what you've seen on tape? I think there will be a team that'll be willing to take that risk and maybe potentially even number one overall.
Yes, I have seen the rumors about Coach Prime going with the Dallas Cowboys, getting some assistant role there. It's unbelievable stuff happening. But what I was going to the point of is that even if the Giants don't draft him, he has no relatives really, in the NFL level at head coach. So not even if Brian Daboll gets on his bad side, but any NFL head coach, he hasn't seen that before. All right, let's continue. We spent a lot of time on Sanders. I don't know who you have written down. We said we were going to write down 5 prospects, so I'm just going to throw a name out there that I have written down, and that's Jackson Dart, who spent his freshman season at USC. The last 3 seasons at Ole Miss, he's a senior. His 70%, almost 71% passer rating is a career high as of now. Also, his 3,400 yards is a career high. That's already been set. So congrats to him. He has a career high now in his senior season. That's the right time you want to peak. 22 touchdowns, 4 interceptions. He also has 304 yards rushing and 3 TDs. He's got a decent arm. Not as good as some of the other guys he mentioned on this list, like Cam Ward, like Jalen Milroe, but he's got a decent arm. He's really good in RPOs and play action. What I saw that Bleacher Report had him written on as a master of those RPO and play action plays. So there you go. And then he's also a taller quarterback. He stands at 6'2". Someone, again, a taller presence. I keep on mentioning Cam Ward, but he's also a taller quarterback. But so is Jackson Dart, someone who you're probably going to see later than those other 2 people I mentioned earlier, but not an elite level arm talent either. Yes, he has a decent arm. That's why I said decent. And then also occasionally abandons that first read a little bit too early, where he could be looking for that number 1 wide receiver a little bit longer, and he just doesn't do that, gets a little nervous, and then scans over the field to find another player, which sometimes works, but sometimes it does not, and results in poor execution. The NFL comparison that I have to Dart is another youngster in Bo Nix. It's funny, Alex, all of these players that we're mentioning here it's getting so frequent in the league now in the NFL. It's going to be such a tough issue to deal with for defenses, and that's all of these players can run. All of these quarterbacks can run. It's really going to send defensive playbooks into a frenzy in a bad way, because you're looking at players of the past, of the Tom Brady's, the Drew Breeses, the Eli and Peyton Mannings. They're gone now. They're long gone. It's a very mobile league now at the QB position, and it's something that Jackson Dart, a player like him, is polished at doing where if he needs to. Alex, who is your player you want to talk about, or did you also have Dart written down?
I had him written down, but I'm going to talk about another guy who I think has been going up and down like a seesaw in the draft rankings. It feels like almost every week, and that's being Quinn Ewers out of Texas. Very interesting player, because I feel like coming into the season, there was a lot of talk of him being a top 5 pick, a top 2 quarterback, maybe even the top guy in this class. And he's not necessarily had a terrible season, but he's very much not performed, I think, up to the expectations that people thought in. A lot of people thought that he'd take this really big leap in his season here with Texas, and he just hasn't really done that. He obviously had that atrocious game where he threw 3 picks, and then Arch Manning came in, he was benched, but he's come back now. He's playing a little bit with a bit more confidence. He's also playing a little bit smarter, a little bit safer, and he's someone who has a very quick release, which is something you see when you watch his film. He's also very accurate, both inside and outside the numbers, which is something that's not super common with a lot of these guys so far. But it's just some decision-making things for him. He gets a little bit, I wouldn't say nervous, but just a little chaotic sometimes in the pocket, and he'll make some mistakes that can cost his team dearly. And that is why he was benched for a short period. So I think there is a lot to be desired with him in terms of his arm talent, his accuracy, and honestly his production at his time in Texas. But there's just something missing there. He's not super big. He's not super quick. He's not a great athlete. And his arm is good, but it's not fantastic. So it kind of feels like you're drafting someone very high up, if you're drafting him in the top 5 or 10, that maybe isn't necessarily going to be a franchise quarterback. And I think that's the issue that a lot of scouts and a lot of teams are having right now with Ewers. But, 19 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. He's not had a bad season whatsoever, but it's just the fact that he has not been able to he's been steadily improving each and every year. But this past season, or this current season, I should say, he just hasn't made another jump. And I think that's always concerning when you don't see that progressive development. And I think that's the issue for Ewers. But it'll be interesting to see how much teams value his earlier years versus his most recent season, and kind of where he ends up floating. I think his combine, his pro day, that kind of stuff could also be very important, in addition to how he finishes off the season.
And then my 5th and final player that I have is Carson Beck, who spent all 4 seasons at Georgia, started the last 2, 65% passer rating, almost 2,500 yards, 17 touchdowns, 12 interceptions. So another guy with not a great ratio. And the last thing I say here about Beck, I just talked about the running backs or the rushing abilities, of these quarterbacks. Beck is not really one that you see doing that very often. And he's really not a strong candidate on this list. Someone I would not want to see, like the New York Giants drafting. He does a really great job throwing in the middle of the field. It really seems like between the numbers, between the hash marks, is where he really thrives. And then on the outside of the numbers, I should say, the towards the sideline, not as well throwing it. And then just simply put, the touchdown to interception ratio has worsened this season than any other year he's played college football. He only has started the last 2 seasons. So comparison to last year, it's not a good time. It's a great time to peak. And I talked about it with other players earlier on this list. It's not a great time to fall off. If you're falling off your senior year, that's a bad look, not only personally in that senior year, but also in terms of NFL readiness. Your NFL teams are not going to like that if you trend it downwards rather than upwards, in your time of college football. And right now with Carson Beck, that's what it seems to be. He also is bad with pocket pressure. His decision making looks really ugly when he's getting pressured inside the pocket, and it's something that sounds very familiar, Giants fans. You're right, because that's probably what you would be thinking if I said this was Daniel Jones. So there's that. And then I leave you with an NFL comparison, and that is Jared Goff. Yes, Carson Beck's NFL comparison is Jared Goff. Do you want a Jared Goff in your football team? Maybe if you're the Lions, because you are really good right now, but in the grand scheme of things, if you want a youngster to be Jared Goff, because that youngster you want to be with your team and your franchise and carry you for the next 5 to 10 years, do you want a Jared Goff in the next 5 to 10 years? It's a tough ask. It's a tough question to answer. If you're asking me, the answer is no. I want a quarterback who I can be confident with scrambling outside and not getting, pressure and not knowing what to do with the football. So that's what I would say about my last guy in Carson Beck.
Yeah, I mean, I had Beck written down too. I think the one thing I'll note, because you basically went over everything for him, but I think it's not necessarily a deal breaker that you don't have the best senior season. Obviously, Drake May did not have a great final season at North Carolina. It still ended up being a top 3 pick. Of course, that was slightly different circumstances. All his weapons were gone. The team wasn't great around him, so that was a little bit more to do with the drop-off, which isn't very much the case at Georgia. But I do think, Beck is a much more prototypical quarterback, which I'm not sure will absolutely help him in this process. He does need to finish the season strong, and I'm not sure if he's going to be a guy that's just going to wow anybody, whether that's at the combine or at his pro day. And I think he's probably just set up to go in the middle rounds. And I think that's just kind of the vibe I get from him, unfortunately. And I think kind of to round it out, the top 3 guys are going to be the guys that are going for sure in the first round. Everyone else, I'm not so sure. And I think, even those top 3 guys, there's going to be a lot of back and forth throughout the rest of the season, throughout the combine process, throughout the pro day process. And I think it's a lot going to come down to personality. Shedeur Sanders probably the best on paper, but how do all those red flags stack up against, some of the other guys that we talked about? And I think that's going to be how it all goes, but not necessarily the best options for the Giants, but I wouldn't say it's a terrible class like a couple years ago either.